So for this lesson three, we're analyzing the introduction to Colin's American Dream. All right. So let's do a review of last week's learning. You learn how the American Dream is presented in two texts. You also practice citing evidence from multiple texts to support analysis of theme. So that the we did theme in lesson two, and we did a comparison between two texts, identifying the theme of dreams and goals as it relates to the American Dream. So today, what we're going to do is read the introduction to the American Dream, a short history of an idea that's shaped by the nation of Jim Colin. And then we're going to analyze how the author introduces his purpose and structures the text to support that purpose. So we'll be reading the first few pages of the text. You should have a copy assigned to you in Cami. So we're going to read through page 8, and I want you to follow along with me. And as you're following along, document instances where the author is trying to introduce his purpose for our text. Okay, so this is what your text should look like. I've made a copy for you in Cami. All right, this is The American Dream by Jim Colin. And so here we begin. Follow along with me. Use your Cami tools to annotate and mark as you see needed. That title won't work, James Truslow Adams was told. No one will pay $3 for a book about a dream. Adams, author of series of popular books on American history, think of him as the David McCullough or Ken Burns of the 1930s, was seeking to broaden his literary horizons. A man with elite bloodlines dating back to the 17th century, when one of his ancestors came to Virginia and an indentured servant ended up in the land-owning class. Adams, born in 1878, had nevertheless grown up under relatively modest circumstances. His father was an unsuccessful Wall Street broker. After graduating from Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute in 1898 and earning a master's degree in philosophy at Yale in 1900, he went to work on Wall Street himself, making enough money to devote himself to writing. His local histories of Long Island brought him some renown and attracted the attention of presidential advisor Colonel Edward M. House, who hired him as an ensemble to assemble data for the Paris Peace Conference following World War I, which he intended as a cartographer in the American delegation. After the war, Adams wrote his New England trilogy, which included the Pulitzer Prize winning The Founding of New England, and gained scholarly recognition for Provincial Society, a volume in the highly regarded History of American Life, series edited by Dixon Ryan Fox and author M. Schlesinger Sr., leading academic historians. He was now poised to become the premier popularizer of his day. Adams wanted to write a one-volume history of the United States for general reader, and his publisher Little Brown agreed. As he noted in the preface, there was no shortage of such books. What he wanted to contribute was a broad interpretive sensibility that emphasized important historical themes. For Adams, no theme was more important than what he called the American Dream. The American dream of a better, richer, and happier life for all citizens of every rank, which is the greatest contribution we have made to the thought and welfare of the world. That dream or hope has been present from the start. Ever since we became an independent nation, each generation has seen an uprising of ordinary Americans to save that dream from those forces which appeared to be overwhelming it. Writing in the early years of the Great Depression, the book was published as the Epic of America. In 1931, Adams sensed he was living on the cusp of such an uprising. Possibly the greatest of these struggles lies just ahead of us at this present time, not a struggle of revolutionists against the established order, but of the ordinary man to hold fast to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which were vouchsafed to us in the past and vision and on parchment. As it turns out, Adams was deeply disillusioned by Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal, feeling they represented a betrayal of American traditions of autonomy and a case of government collusion in the creation of soulless, materialistic consumer society. Though he would remain popular for the rest of the decade, Adams was increasingly out of step with the temper of times, and he died disappointed with his country in 1948. In retrospect, it seems odd that Adams was talked out of his wish to call his most popular book The American Dream. While it's not clear whether he actually coined the term or appropriated it from someone else, his publisher's reluctance to use it suggests American Dream was not in widespread use elsewhere. In any event, Adams invoked it over 30 times in the Epic of America, and the phrase rapidly entered common parlance by byword for what he thought his country was about. Not only is the United States, but is the rest of the world. So, in this regard, it is notable that the edition of the book happened to pluck off the shelf at the Harvard College Library came from a 1941 edition stamped as the property of an Army educational supervisor stationed in Europe. The American Dream had become a weapon in the fight against Hitler. One can only wonder that there was once a moment when these words, American Dream, could be dismissed as obscure or unappealing. Times changed. When in an earlier phase of this project, I typed those words into the library catalog. I got back over 700 titles: Education in the American Dream, Tenants in the American Dream, Advertising the American Dream, The American Dream and Popular Novel, The Endangered American Dream, Prisoners of the American Dream, and so on. None of the books I looked at makes anything like a systematic attempt to define the term or trace its origins. Its definition is virtually taken for granted. It's as if no one feels compelled to fix the meanings and uses of a term everyone presumably understands, which today appears to mean that in the United States, anything is possible if you want it badly enough. Actually, American Dream has long since moved beyond the relatively musty domain of print culture into the incandescent glow of the mass media, where it is enshrined on our national motto. Jubilant athletes declaim it following championship games. Aspiring politicians invoke it as the basis of their candidacies. Otherwise, sober businessmen cite achieving it as the ultimate goal of their enterprises. The term seems like the most lofty as well as the most immediate component of an American identity, a birthright far more meaningful and compelling than those terms like democracy, constitution, or even the United States. The omnipresence of the American dream stems from a widespread, though not universal, belief that the concept describes something very contemporary. At the same time, however, much of its vitality rests on a premise which I share that is part of a long tradition. In this view, the Pilgrims may not have actually talked about the American dream, but they would have understood the idea. After all, they lived in it as people who imagined a destiny for themselves. So did the Founding Fathers. So did illiterate immigrants who could not speak English but intuitively express rhythms of the dream with their hands and their hearts. What Alexis de Tocqueville called the charm of anticipated success, his classic Democracy in America, seemed palpable to him not only in the 1830s, but in his understanding of American history for 200 years before that, and it still seems to almost 200 years later. In the 21st century, the American dream remains a major element of our national identity, and yet national identity is itself marked by a sense of uncertainty that may well be greater than ever before. Over the course of human history, people have used any number of means to identify themselves: blood, religion, language, geography, a shared history, or some combination of these. Japan comes to mind as an example that draws all of them. Yet the United States was essentially a creation of the collective imagination inspired by the existence of a purportedly new world, realized in a revolution that began with the explicitly articulate declaration and consolidated in the writing of a durable constitution. And it is a nation that has been recreated as a deliberate act of conscious choice every time in person has landed on these shores. Explicit allegiance, not involuntary inheritance, is the theoretical basis of the American identity. To be sure, the United States has also benefited from some of the glue that holds together our nations. But at the turn of the century, some of that social cement is loosening. Some ways, large transnational institutions like corporations shape the lives of ordinary citizens far more than local governments. Economic and racial stratification have grown markedly, raising doubts with that breadth and depth of opportunity. Amid the greatest surge of immigration is our history, one that brings more people from more of the world than ever before. We don't always speak the same language. At a time like this, the American dream becomes a kind of lingua franca, an idiom that everyone from corporate executives to hip hop artists can presumably understand. Indeed, one of the most remarkable things about the dream is its hold on those one might think are most likely to be skeptical, even hostile toward it. In her 1996 book, Facing Up to the American Dream, political scientist Jennifer Hochschild compiles data suggesting that working class black Americans, for example, believe in it with an intensity that baffles and even appalls more affluent African Americans who see the dream as an opiate that lulls people in ignoring the structural barriers that prevent collective as well as personal advancement. This book grows out of belief that any attempt to assess the possibilities and limits of the American dream requires a more thorough reckoning than we customarily give it. Such a reckoning begins with the recognition that the dream is neither a reassuring verity or nor an attempt bromide, but rather a complex idea with manifold implications that can cut different ways. Some of these implications involve the oft overlooked cost of dreaming, the unfulfilled yearnings of Jimmy Stewart's character in It's a Wonderful Life, for example, are never quite erased by the movie's happy ending. The failure of countless social reforms in this country, which founder on the confidence of individual citizens that they will be the ones who overcome the odds and get rich, is one of the great themes of American politics. And we all heard stories about celebrities who find themselves overwhelmed by the success they so fiercely pursued and attained. On the other hand, simply having a dream has sustained, even saved, lives that otherwise might not be deemed worth living. The American dream would have no drama or mystique if it were a self-evident falsehood of scientifically demonstrable principle. Ambiguity is the very source of its mythic power, nowhere more so than among those striving for but unsure whether they will reach their goals. Yet resolution may not afford clarity either. Those who fail may confront troubling, even unanswerable questions. Do I blame myself? Bad luck. The unattainability of the objective. Such uncertainty may be no less haunting for the successful. You may also question the basis of their success and its price. Beyond such considerations, a reckoning with the dream also involves acknowledging another important reality, that beyond an abstract belief and possibility. There is no one American dream. Indeed, there are many American dreams. Their appeal simultaneously resting on their variety and their specificity. What James Truslow Adams called in the epilogue of the Epic of America, that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for every man, may be fine as far as gone, but the devil is in the details. Just what does better and richer and fuller mean? The answers vary. Sometimes better and richer and fuller is defined in terms of money. In the contemporary United States, one could believe that is only the definition, but there are others: religious transformation, political reform, educational attainment, sexual expression, and a list is endless. These answers have not been available at any given time. They are also changed over time and competed for the status of common sense. This book explores a few varieties of the American dream, their origins, their dynamics, their ongoing relevance. It does so by describing a series of specific American dreams in a loosely chronological overlapping order. I begin with that I regard as the first great American dream, that of small groups of English religious dissenters who traversed an ocean seeking a way of worshiping God as they see fit. Their dream was once of manifold ironies, not the least of which involved their clearing a space for subsequent generations to come and pursue aspirations they would have found reprehensible if they could comprehend them at all. I then proceed to examine that I call the Charter of the American Dream the Declaration of Independence. The political manifesto was the cornerstone of the American Revolution, the justification for a small group of men to seize the reins of power from the British. But almost despite itself and the intentions of the man who signed it, the Declaration resonated far beyond such relatively narrow aims. My point is to show that, notwithstanding the almost impossible remoteness and ambiguity surrounding its creation, the document has immediacy and appeal that has coursed through the marrow of everyday life ever since.